She was harsh and cruel in her words.
You're a ballerina. You have no record, no enrollment, no history, and clearly no way to pay.
But I love to dance. I dance with my heart.
You really think you'll become a ballerina someday? That's nothing but an illusion. But if you insist, I'll have the best seat in the house to watch you fail.
And she danced, not with perfection, but with passion. And still, it wasn't enough.
Don't cry, girl. I told you you weren't good enough. That it was all just a fantasy. I proved you wrong. Now go home and find something else to do.
But this story doesn't begin there. Before we go on, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. I really need your help to reach 1,000 subscribers. Now, let's enjoy the story. Many years ago, when orphanages still housed hundreds of children forgotten by the world, there was a secluded home nestled deep in the state of Vermont. Surrounded by thick forests and mist-covered hills for most of the year, it was an old brick building with tall windows that let in the pale morning light. That's where Emily Parker lived, a 12-year-old girl who, even in the midst of the loneliness and strict routine of that place, carried within her a dream that no one had ever managed to extinguish. She wanted to become a ballerina. Emily was small for her age, with long brown hair usually tied with a faded ribbon, and striking blue eyes that seemed to see beyond the cold walls of the orphanage. Despite the exhausting and repetitive routine, she found tiny moments of freedom when everyone else was asleep. There, in the dark hallway between the cafeteria and the study room, she would dance alone, listening to the melody her imagination played. Her bare feet would glide across the wooden floor, and for a few brief moments, she would forget she was an orphan. She'd forget the cold days without visitors, the silent Christmases, the birthdays without cake. In those moments, she was just a ballerina. The orphanage survived on meager donations and was run by a strict director. The children followed a rigid schedule: wake up at dawn, help with chores, washing dishes, sweeping hallways, scrubbing bathrooms, and then study with the only teacher on staff, Miss Agnes. She was a middle-aged, thin, and stern woman who taught English, math, history, and science to all ages in a single classroom. Despite her tough exterior, Miss Agnes had a watchful eye. She noticed when a child was sad, when someone needed more time with their words, or when a tiny girl drifted off into her own thoughts while copying a grammar exercise. And it was on one of those gray mornings, while she was writing a lesson on the board, that she turned to the class and said a simple phrase, one that, for Emily, would change everything. If any of you have a dream, then you need to fight for it, even if no one believes in it. Dreams only come true when we give them everything we've got. The words floated in the air like any other lesson. Most of the students quickly went back to copying notes in their notebooks. But to Emily, it wasn't just a phrase. It was like a seed planted in fertile soil. Her heart beat faster, as if someone had finally said something that confirmed what she had always known deep in her soul. She didn't want to spend her life scrubbing bathrooms or washing dishes in silence. She wanted to be on stage. She wanted to dance. And not just dance, she wanted to be the best. That night, after the usual silent dinner and routine prayers, Emily sat on her bed longer than usual, staring into the darkness of the shared dormitory. While the other girls were already asleep, she hugged her knees and whispered to herself, "If I don't do something, no one else will." And then, without knowing exactly how or when, Emily made a quiet decision. One day, she would leave that orphanage. She would chase her dream, no matter what it cost. Autumn had settled over the village, and the red brick orphanage looked even more melancholic under the gray sky and cold winds that swept through the trees of the nearby woods. Orange leaves gathered in the corners of the stone walls, and the bare tree branches cast thin, eerie shadows across the damp ground. It was as if nature itself was preparing for the silence of winter. Emily felt that silence growing inside her too. In recent days, she could barely focus in Miss Agnes's lessons. Her mind was consumed by one thought: leaving. The decision had already been made. It was risky, it was dangerous, but she knew that if she stayed, her dream of becoming a ballerina would slowly fade away, just like the chapel candles that only burned during evening prayers. She began preparing carefully, waiting for the right moment. For 3 days, She watched closely the schedule of the woman in charge of locking the outer gates, always around 9 o'clock at night, shortly after the last room inspection. Emily knew she'd have only one chance. On the night she chose, the orphanage was cloaked in darkness. The lights were off, the hall was empty, and a soft sound of rain tapped against the windows. The other girls were fast asleep, curled under thin blankets. Emily put on her warmest clothes, a brown sweater, thick pants, and a worn pair of boots she'd been given last winter. Everything she owned fit into a small gray cloth suitcase. Already frayed at the corners, 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a small notebook filled with cutouts from dance magazines, and an old photo of her mother, a woman she had never known, but always carried close to her heart. With a heavy heart, she wrote a short but sincere note. She folded it carefully and placed it on her pillow, along with the faded blue ribbon she wore in her hair every day. Don't worry about me. I'm going after my dreams. One day, you'll hear about me. With love, Emily. With light steps, she crossed the dark hallway, past the study room, the empty cafeteria, and finally reached the back door. She used the tip of a pair of scissors, something she'd hidden away for days, to unlock the old latch. The metallic click was soft, but her heart pounded in her chest. For a moment, she thought about turning back. She thought of her warm bed, the smell of vegetable soup from the kitchen, the occasional laughter during recreation hour. But then she heard Miss Agnes's words echo once more in her mind. If you have a dream, you need to fight for it. She took a deep breath and stepped through the door. The light rain kissed her face like a whisper from the unknown. Emily made her way to the front gate, slipped through a gap in the fence, and vanished down the road, swallowed by the misty forest night. She walked for hours with no clear direction, guided only by the faint glow of old village streetlights and a vague memory of a map she'd seen once. Her goal was clear: reach the big city, where the famous ballet school was located, one she'd heard about from a visitor at the orphanage years ago. According to that visitor, the school was in Boston, the state capital. Emily knew it was far, but she didn't care. She was willing to walk, to hitchhike, to sleep wherever she had to. By dawn, her feet ached, and her clothes were soaked, but in the distance, she spotted a pickup truck parked near a gas station. A middle-aged man with a kind face was sipping coffee while filling his tank. With courage, Emily approached. "Hi, are you going to Boston?" she asked. The man looked at her, surprised, then curious. He noticed the suitcase, the wet clothes, the determined eyes. After a few minutes of conversation, and although still wary, he decided to help her. "Hop in. But I'll only drop you near the city, okay? From there, you're on your own." Emily thanked him with a shy but sincere smile. As the truck sped down the wet road, she looked out the back window, watching the trees slowly disappear behind her. That cold morning, she left behind the orphanage, the silent childhood, and truly began chasing her dream. The Boston sky was heavy with thick clouds when Emily stepped out of the truck. Near the central station, the man who had brought her handed her a small package of cookies and offered a gentle smile. "Good luck, kid. I hope you find what you're looking for." Emily's eyes sparkled with gratitude. She didn't know his name, but she would never forget his kindness. With her suitcase in one hand and hope in the other, she crossed the city following directions given by a woman at the gas station. After nearly an hour of walking, she arrived in front of a grand stone building with tall windows and a glass entrance framed by white columns. A golden plaque shimmered with the words, "Boston Academy of Dance." Founded in 1926, Emily paused for a moment to take it all in. Outside, girls and boys in pristine uniforms and dance bags bustled about excitedly, many accompanied by their parents. She looked down at her own clothes, wet and wrinkled from the journey, and felt a pang in her chest. But she didn't turn back. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The main lobby was wide and quiet, with pale marble floors, mirrored walls, and the faint sound of classical music drifting from one of the classrooms. Behind the reception desk sat a refined-looking woman with blonde hair pulled tightly into a bun, and a stern expression. She was Mrs. Collins, the school secretary, known for her cold demeanor and judgmental gaze. Emily approached, trying to look confident despite her racing heart. "Excuse me, ma'am, I'd like to enroll in this school, Mrs. Collins slowly looked up, as if she were being disturbed by something insignificant. Her eyes scanned the girl from head to toe, taking in the suitcase, the plain clothes, the messy hair. Do you have an appointment? Are your parents with you? I don't have parents. I came alone. But I'm a dancer, and I want to study here. The woman raised a skeptical eyebrow. Then she let out a short, sarcastic laugh, full of impatience. You're a dancer? I've never seen you here. You have no file, no registration, no record, and clearly no way to pay. What makes you think you can just walk into one of the most prestigious schools in the country? Emily felt her face flush, but she kept her gaze steady. Because I dance with my heart. Because I was born for this. And because I know I can be the best. Her direct and confident answer caught the secretary off guard. Mrs. Collins let out another, even more scornful laugh. How precious. Sweetheart, you're just a silly little dreamer. You think you'll become a ballerina someday? That's nothing but an illusion. Well, you're in luck. As it happens, there's an audition today for a scholarship spot. But let me be clear, every girl competing has been training since she was 4. They're disciplined, polished, and are professional. But if you insist, I can take you there, and I'll have front row seats to watch you fail. The woman stood up and waved her hand dismissively for Emily to follow. Behind her rigid posture, there was something cruel in the gesture, like someone leading a lamb to slaughter, certain it wouldn't survive. They walked through wide hallways, where students with tightly pinned hair and flawless leotards stretched, warmed up, or practiced perfect movements in front of mirrors. Emily walked silently, but her eyes were full of determination. She didn't have the right clothes or the right shoes, but she carried something no one else there seemed to have, a hunger to succeed. When they reached the main studio, Mrs. Collins made a point to announce with a mocking tone, "Teachers, we have here a last-minute candidate. Says she's a ballerina, never taken a class, came alone, but insists she was born for this. Want to see for yourselves 3 instructors, 2 men and 1 woman, were seated behind a long table." They exchanged puzzled looks, then turned their attention to Emily, intrigued. "Are you sure you want to audition?" one of them asked. "I am. It's all I want, Mrs. Collins then pressed a button, and soft music began to play, Debussy's Clair de Lune. The melody filled the room as if it were playing straight from the girl's soul. She danced the only way she knew how, from the heart. Her movements lacked technique. They were clumsy, unrefined. But inside her, there was something different. A raw passion. Something rarely seen anymore. In a place filled with girls forced to dance by ambitious mothers, dancing without love, only fear of what the teachers would say. But that girl didn't care who was watching. She didn't even know who they were. Every movement came from within. Her soul pulsed in time with the music. She danced like it was the only way she knew how to breathe, like she was fighting for her life. Every step, every gesture was a conversation with her own destiny. The room, once cold and formal, began to fill with a strange energy. The teachers set down their pens. One leaned forward, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. The woman on the panel, who had been sitting with arms crossed, now kept her eyes fixed on the girl, as if something in Emily had touched an old, forgotten memory. But Mrs. Collins, she laughed, a low, satisfied chuckle. To her, it was all pathetic. When the music ended, Emily stopped in the center of the room, breathless, her hands pressed to her chest. She waited for an answer, a chance, a miracle. The teachers looked at one another. The oldest among them let out a long breath. "You've never taken a dance class before, have you? Never." "But I'm a dancer. I've been dancing for as long as I can remember." There was a brief silence, as if no one quite knew what to say. "You have passion. That much is clear. But technique, you're still far from where you need to be. We can't offer you the scholarship right now. There are other girls more prepared." "I'm sorry." Emily felt as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. She thanked them, her eyes brimming with tears, and quietly walked toward the door. Mrs. Collins crossed her arms, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. "Don't cry, girl. I told you you weren't good enough, that it was all just a fantasy in your head. I proved you wrong. Now go home and find something else to do." Emily didn't respond. She simply walked away, carrying her suitcase, shoulders slumped, her heart shattered. She stopped at the staircase in front of the school. The rain had started again. And there, alone, sitting on the wet steps, Emily cried, for the first time since leaving the orphanage. She truly cried, not out of homesickness, not out of fear, but because she felt that maybe the world really was too cruel to someone who only wanted to dance. The rain slid down the stone steps like silent tears, blending with the ones that streamed down Emily's face. Sitting on the cold steps at the entrance of the academy, with her knees pulled to her chest and her suitcase beside her, she sobbed quietly, trying to contain the pain that spilled from within. The secretary's words still echoed in her mind like arrows. It was all just an illusion. She had given everything she had, left the orphanage, braved the road, slept in the cold, danced from her soul, only to hear that it wasn't enough. Emily felt empty, for the first time. She doubted whether she could truly make it. Maybe she had been foolish to believe that dreaming was enough, but someone was watching her. On the other side of the school's glass doors, a modest-looking woman in a navy blue uniform, with gray hair tied back in a low bun, stood holding a bucket and a cleaning rag. She had been there during the audition. She had stopped scrubbing the hallway and watched from a crack in the door. And now, she stood watching the girl on the steps curled up, alone, with a broken heart. The woman took a deep breath, set the bucket aside, and quietly slipped outside. She walked slowly toward Emily, with gentle steps like someone in a hurry, but careful not to frighten. "Hey, sweetheart, mind if I sit here with you?" Emily looked up, wiping her face with the sleeve of her shirt. She was surprised. No one ever approached her when she cried. Her eyes were still red, but there was a quiet curiosity in her gaze. "Who are you?" "My name is Margaret. I'm the janitor here. I saw you dance, and after all these years in this place, I know real talent when I see it. And you're a gem, but you need to be polished. I'd like to help you." Emily hesitated for a moment. She was tired, cautious, but there was something different in that woman's voice. No judgment, no pity, just her sincerity. She wiped away the tears that still clung to her cheeks and began to share her story. That she was an orphan, that she had run away from the orphanage to chase her dreams, and that, deep in her heart, she knew she was born to be a ballerina. Margaret was moved by the girl's words and nodded gently. "My dear, no other dancer today moved like you did. You dance with your soul, with something you can't learn in class. And I can help you. Help me how? I live just behind the school, in a small cottage. I don't have much to offer, but if you'd like, you can stay with me. In the mornings, you help me with the cleaning. In the afternoons, I'll teach you to dance. At night, you'll study. And next semester, we'll try for that scholarship again. Only this time, you'll be ready." Emily stayed silent. It felt like a dream. After so much loneliness, someone was finally reaching out. And not just anyone, someone who saw her, who believed in her. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked softly. Margaret looked ahead, toward the city skyline fading into the mist. "Because you reminded me of myself, and because real talent deserves a real chance. I believe in you, Emily. I truly do." Emily took a deep breath. Her heart still felt heavy, but now there was a spark inside. Small, fragile, but lit. Without thinking twice, she extended her hand. "Okay, I accept." Margaret gently took the girl's hand in hers. And in that simple gesture, something much bigger was born, something stronger than a partnership. A new kind of family was beginning. The two stood up and walked through the drizzle toward the little cottage tucked behind the academy. The house was modest, filled with old furniture and the comforting scent of coffee and wood. But it was warm. It was alive. That night, Emily slept in a clean bed, wrapped in a soft blanket, and in the rare, beautiful feeling of being in the right place. For the first time since leaving the orphanage, she felt at home. And the next morning, before the sun had even risen, her new path would begin, with brooms, mops, and plies. The next morning, as the pale light of dawn began to stretch across the Boston sky, Emily slowly opened her eyes. The room where she had slept was simple, but filled with comforting details: a handmade quilt, a bookshelf with old dance books, a small lace curtain fluttering in the breeze from the window. For the first time in many years, She had slept without fear and awakened with hope. Margaret's house was small, but it overflowed with warmth. The walls were covered in framed pictures of ballerinas and sheets of music, and in the corner of the living room sat an old radio playing classical ballets at a low volume. It wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary. Emily got up, neatly made her bed, and followed the scent of coffee coming from the kitchen. Margaret was already up, dressed in her janitor's uniform, and toasting bread on the stove. "Good morning, ballerina," she said with a gentle smile. Emily returned the greeting, her eyes shining in a way they hadn't in a long time. "Good morning." They sat down for a simple but delicious breakfast. Margaret laid out the routine they would follow from then on. In the mornings, both would head to the school, Margaret to clean, and Emily to help her in every corner. After lunch, the training would begin. And at night, using borrowed notebooks and old books from the school's library, Emily would study. It would be exhausting, but it was the only path forward. And more than that, it was the right one. That very day, Emily discovered the true meaning of the word work. She spent the morning scrubbing hallways, collecting trash, sweeping classrooms, cleaning smudged mirrors. It was grueling. Her hands started burning within the first few hours, but she didn't complain. Every floor she cleaned was another step toward the stage. By noon, they returned home and ate a vegetable stew Margaret had made the night before. After washing the dishes together, Margaret put on a soft piece of music on the radio and led Emily to the only open space in the house, a small wooden room with a smooth floor and a cracked mirror on the wall. That would be their improvised studio. "We'll start from the beginning. It's not the jump that impresses, it's the strong foundation." And so, the training began. Margaret was not a typical teacher. Her movements, even after so many years away from the stage, still held a natural grace. She corrected Emily's posture gently, showed her how to stretch every part of her body, taught the name of each position with patience, and Emily, clumsy at first, absorbed everything like a sponge. Her eyes sparkled, and her body, though tired, seemed to come alive with each new step. The first few days were tough. Her feet ached, her legs trembled. Emily fell over and over again. She cried alone in the bathroom, doubting if she could really keep up. But Margaret always lifted her with steady hands. Every ballerina has fallen 1,000 times. The best ones aren't those who never fall. They're the ones who always get back up, and Emily got back up. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and little by little, something extraordinary began to happen. Emily began to transform. Her body grew stronger, lighter. Her posture shifted. Movements that had once been hesitant became precise and intentional. But more importantly, her soul never stopped dancing, and now it had the technique to go with it. Margaret watched each step of her progress with discreet, emotional eyes. The raw talent she had discovered on the school steps was now blossoming before her. And more than technique, Emily was developing something rare: presence. She danced with truth. At night, after their improvised study sessions and simple dinners, they would talk. Slowly, the once quiet orphan girl and the solitary woman from the school built an unbreakable bond. They spoke about music, childhood, loss, and hope. Emily learned that Margaret had lived alone for years and rarely spoke about her past. But she never complained. She would simply smile and say, "Some people spend their whole lives waiting for a second chance, and sometimes it shows up disguised as a girl sitting on the steps." Over time, Emily had become someone new, not just physically, but inside. She was stronger, wiser, and more certain than ever that she hadn't run away to escape her past, but to build a new chapter. And that chapter was getting closer, the next scholarship audition at the Boston Academy of Dance. But this time, she would be ready. Then came the long-awaited day, the new audition for a scholarship at the Boston Academy of Dance. Emily woke up before the sun. The bedroom window was fogged with cold, reflecting the silhouette of a girl who, in just a few months, had gone from being a mere dreamer to someone ready to fight for her place in the world of dance. She dressed in her practice outfit with steady hands. It was a simple leotard, no shimmer, no designer label, but she wore it with pride. Margaret stood in the doorway with a cup of hot tea in her hands, watching the girl and feeling something she hadn't felt in years: hope. "You're not just going to dance today," she said softly. You're going to tell your story with every step." Emily nodded with a calm smile. She wasn't nervous. She was centered, because she knew how much she had prepared. She knew what she had overcome. And more importantly, she knew who she had become. When she arrived at the school, the hallways were more crowded than usual. Anxious mothers helped their daughters slick back their hair with gel and bobby pins. Girls in high-end leotards with flawless makeup floated down the corridors with grace and confidence. Emily walked among them with her worn-out bag slung over her shoulder, and her eyes fixed straight ahead. As she passed through the reception area, Mrs. Collins slowly looked up from her paperwork. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize her. Emily was no longer the awkward little girl from months ago. But as soon as she realized who it was, the secretary raised an eyebrow and said in that same biting tone, Well, back for another horror show, sweetheart." Emily stopped, looked her straight in the eyes, and replied calmly, "I came back to show you why you should never laugh at someone else's dreams." And she kept walking. Mrs. Collins was silent for a moment, caught off guard, and watched as the girl disappeared down the hallway toward the main rehearsal studio. Inside, the same panel of teachers who had judged Emily during her first audition sat with clipboards in hand. Some chatted quietly, others watched the candidates warming up. When Emily walked in, all eyes turned to her. One of the instructors murmured, "It's that girl, the one from the steps." She gave a slight nod and moved to a corner of the room, where she began to warm up. Her movements were clean, graceful, confident, nothing like last time. The transformation was unmistakable. When her name was called, the room fell silent. The music began, Adagio for Strings by Samuel Barber. A bold choice, deep, emotional. Emily took her position at the center. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, and then she danced. Her body flowed with both softness and strength. Every movement was charged with meaning. There was no hesitation. Yes, there was pain, the pain of someone who had fallen many times, but there was also triumph, discipline, surrender. She danced like someone who had lived, who had survived, who had turned every fall into poetry. As she moved across the floor, the teachers slowly lowered their pens. One of them brought a hand to his chin, visibly impressed. The oldest female instructor let out a breathless whisper, "My God, it's like the music became flesh." Even Mrs. Collins, who had slipped in discreetly to witness what she expected to be a spectacular failure, stood frozen behind the glass. Her eyes widened, her mouth slightly open, and her words vanished. When the music ended, Emily stood still, her chest rising and falling gently. Time seemed suspended. And then, as if an invisible wave had swept through the room, the judges rose to their feet. Applause erupted. Not formal, obligatory applause. Genuine, emotional. One of the evaluators, visibly moved, stepped forward toward Emily. "You've astonished us. You're unrecognizable. Technique, expression, control, and soul. You are what we call an artist." Another added, "The scholarship is yours, without a doubt. It will be an honor to have you among our students." Emily bit her lower lip, trying to hold back the tears. But she couldn't. They came hot and silent, not out of sadness, but out of overwhelming gratitude. She looked toward the glass doors. Margaret was there, hands over her heart, crying quietly, like someone watching a miracle unfold. Emily ran to her. They embraced tightly, like mother and daughter, like soul and shelter. Margaret whispered in her ear, "You did it." And Emily replied, "We did it." That day, the doors of the school opened for Emily. But more than that, the world was beginning to see what Margaret had always known. Behind that girl on the steps was a ballerina destined to shine. Emily's life had completely changed. She no longer scrubbed the school's hallways. She now walked them in ballet slippers, head held high, wearing the official uniform of the Boston Academy of Dance, the golden emblem stitched proudly on her chest. Yes, she was a scholarship student, but everyone treated her like a star. And not because of the title, nor the unforgettable audition, but because of the way she danced. Emily had become the girl everyone quietly watched when she entered a room. Her technique improved with every class, but it was her passion, her presence, that made her shine. She danced as if every movement carried meaning, and it did. She danced for herself, for Margaret, for every forgotten girl in nameless orphanages. At the end of each day, Emily returned to the little cottage behind the school, where Margaret waited with a simple dinner and words of encouragement. The two laughed, studied, and shared stories. Their bond was that of mother and daughter, in every way except on paper. But Emily began to notice something. During their at-home rehearsals, Margaret corrected her with remarkable precision. She noticed the smallest details, the alignment of her shoulders, the firmness of her ankles, the rhythm of her breath. And more than that, when Margaret demonstrated a movement, even with a body slowed by the years and aching joints, there was an undeniable beauty in every gesture. One night, as they ate pumpkin soup and buttered toast, Emily decided to ask, "Margaret, can I ask you something?" The woman looked up, curious. "Of course, dear. How do you know so much about ballet? I mean, you've never told me if you ever danced. But you teach like a real professional." Margaret smiled with a mix of nostalgia and pain. For a moment, her eyes seemed to drift to a time far away. "You really want to know?" Emily nodded. Margaret stood, walked to a small wooden cabinet in the corner of the room, and pulled out a box lined with blue fabric. She returned to the table, sat down, and slowly opened it. Inside were old letters, yellowed notes, medals, and at the bottom, a black and white photograph. A young girl with an intense expression, her body extended in a perfect arabesque, standing before the same cracked mirror where Emily now trained every day. "That's me. I was 17. The school's most awarded student. That year, I was accepted into an international company. It was the beginning of my future." Emily was speechless. She stared at the photo as if it held a long-buried secret. "But what happened?" Margaret took a deep breath. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. "My parents and I were on our way to the theater when we had a car accident. They didn't survive. I did. I had several fractures. I spent months unable to walk. My body healed, but my soul didn't. I gave everything up. The school director offered to let me stay on and teach until I was ready to return to the stage. But I couldn't. I didn't want to go back on any stage. I asked to be a janitor. They were hesitant, thinking maybe one day I'd change my mind. But time passed, and I just faded." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She gently took Margaret's hand. "You didn't fade. You were just waiting for someone to help reignite that light." Margaret smiled, moved. "And that's exactly what you did. I helped you, yes, but the truth is, you're the one who brought me back to life." The two of them embraced for a long time, as if stitching together each other's oldest wounds. That night, as Emily got ready for bed, she stared at Margaret's photograph for a long while. It felt strange to think that such an extraordinary ballerina had chosen the quiet of cleaning floors over the spotlight of the stage. But now, it seemed that fate had brought two broken paths together to form one. Emily fell asleep with her heart warm. She knew she had a greater mission than simply shining. She carried Margaret's legacy in every step she took. And deep down, she felt this story was only just beginning. Years passed quickly at the Boston Academy of Dance, and Emily's reputation grew like the tide rising to meet the moon. Teachers praised her often. Classmates watched with admiration and, at times, quiet discomfort. The way she danced with a rare kind of truth. But Emily remained the same, humble, quiet, dedicated. She never lost her essence, nor did she let herself be dazzled by attention. During breaks, instead of chatting and laughing in the hallways with the others, she preferred to sit near the window in the studio, tracing imaginary steps in the air with her fingers. When the music played, she gave herself entirely to it. For those moments, it was as if the world didn't exist, only her and the dance. It was on a cold November morning that the news arrived after 4 years of hard work. The school's artistic director, the stern and demanding Mr. Whitmore, entered the classroom during a lesson with a white envelope in hand. He almost never interrupted rehearsals. His presence alone was enough to silence the entire room. "Emily Parker," he called out firmly. She stood up immediately, confused. "Yes, sir." He handed her the envelope, his eyes locked on hers. "This year's production for our annual showcase will be Swan Lake, and you've been chosen for the lead role, Odette." A murmur rippled through the room. Some girls gasped. Others furrowed their brows in envy. Emily stood frozen, envelope in hand, unsure if she had heard him correctly. I was chosen. The director nodded. Double quotes, yes. Not just for your technique, but because you dance like few I've ever seen. We need someone who doesn't just perform, but feels. And you feel. Congratulations. Rehearsals start Monday. When he left the room, the atmosphere burst into a flurry of restrained reactions. The teacher, smiling, gestured for Emily to open the envelope. Inside were the production script, the rehearsal schedule, and a sheet with her name printed at the top, beneath the title, Principal Dancer Emily Parker. She walked slowly to the locker room, still in shock. Inside, she sat on the wooden bench and stared at the form for several seconds. The paper trembled in her hands, and along with it, her heart. It wasn't a dream. It was real. She was the lead, the star of the most important performance of the year. That night, when she arrived home, she found Margaret preparing soup, as always. But something in Emily's expression made her stop what she was doing. Did something happen? Emily smiled, bit her lip, and held out the sheet. Margaret read it in silence. When her eyes reached the line that read Principal Dancer, Swan Lake, they filled with tears. Odette, she whispered, overcome with emotion. That was my role. Emily looked at her, surprised. You danced this ballet too? Margaret nodded with a nostalgic smile. It was my last. I was rehearsing as the lead when the accident happened. I never got to premiere. The two stood in silence for a few moments. Then Emily stepped closer and took the hands of the woman who had saved her life in so many ways. Then now it's like you're stepping back on stage. Through me, Margaret pulled her into a long, tight embrace. You are everything I once dreamed of being, and more. Watching you dance this role will be like breathing again. In the days that followed, rehearsals became intense. Emily threw herself, body and soul, into the choreography of Odette. The Swan Queen, a tragic figure, delicate and powerful at the same time. Every step demanded precision. Every gesture, raw emotion. The choreographic direction was demanding, and expectations grew even stricter. But Emily never wavered. Each night, when she came home, Margaret was there waiting, with a warm meal, ice packs, and a silent embrace. Together, they reviewed steps, fine-tuned small details, revisited emotions. It was as if, slowly, two stories were being danced at once. The story of a girl who had run away from an orphanage to dream, and that of a woman pulled from the stage at the height of her youth. They completed each other, and without knowing it, they were about to face the greatest trial of their lives, because the past was about to knock on their door. There were just 4 days left until the premiere of Swan Lake. The Academy buzzed with activity. Lighting technicians adjusted the spotlights, costume designers made final fittings, and instructors reviewed every movement with surgical precision. Emily Parker's name echoed through the halls. With reverence, everyone wanted to see the scholarship girl who had earned the lead role through nothing but soul and sweat. That morning, during a general rehearsal, Emily arrived earlier than usual. Alone on the empty stage, she danced part of the second act in silence, guided only by the sound of her breath and the echo of her steps. Every movement was a quiet thank you for how far she had come. She felt, somehow, that the stage was alive, breathing with her. Margaret watched quietly from the wings, as she did every day, her eyes overflowing with pride. But this would be no ordinary day. At exactly 10 a.m., during a short break, the main doors of the theater swung open abruptly. 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by a stern-looking middle-aged woman with thick glasses and an air of authority. She was the director of Maple Hill Orphanage, the place Emily had left behind years ago. A heavy silence fell over the theater. Teachers exchanged uneasy glances. Margaret, who recognized the woman instantly, felt her stomach twist into knots. Emily stepped down from the stage cautiously, confused, trying to understand what was happening. When the officers spotted her, they approached with serious expressions. "Are you Emily Parker?" one of them asked. "Yes, I am," she answered, her voice trembling. The orphanage director cut in coldly. "We found you. It took time, but the day has come. Running away from an orphanage is a serious offense. You're still a minor. You can't live on your own." Emily took a step back, as if she'd been struck. The world seemed to spin around her. All the years of struggle, of progress, of rebuilding, now threatened by a past determined to drag her back to where she started. But I'm not alone. I have someone. I study here, I work hard. I have a home. It's not enough, the director replied, her tone firm, leaving no room for argument. The law requires a legal guardian, and as of now, there is no official record of an adoption in your name. You must return to the orphanage, Emily. Today, her voice was cold and unyielding. The officers stepped closer, gently, not aggressive, but with the clear intent of taking her in. At that moment, one of the dancers came running from backstage, her face filled with panic. She rushed straight to the room where Margaret was carefully cleaning Emily's costume, with all the tenderness in the world. Margaret, they're taking Emily. The orphanage director, the police. You have to go, now. Margaret dropped everything and raced down the hallways, her heart pounding in her chest. When she reached the theater, she saw the officers already standing close to Emily, who clutched her backpack tightly to her chest like a shield. Without hesitation, Margaret crossed the stage like a storm. She stopped in front of the police and the director, tears in her eyes, her voice trembling. But steady, she's not alone. I took her in. I take care of her. I love her. She's my daughter. The theater fell completely silent. Emily's eyes widened. Margaret had never said those words aloud before, but to her, they sounded like the truest words she'd ever heard. This girl arrived here alone, broken. I held her. I gave her a home, food, support. I taught her to dance. She gave me back my life, my light. I will not let her be taken away from what is rightfully hers, not again. The director, clearly unsettled, tried to maintain her authority, but there is no legal adoption. Without paperwork, this is only then let's make it legal. Margaret interrupted. Please, let me adopt her. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. Because I will not let you take my daughter away from me. Emily couldn't hold back. She ran to Margaret and wrapped her arms around her, crying uncontrollably. I don't want to go back. I have a home. It's with you. You are my family. The police officers, visibly moved by the scene, hesitated. One of them looked at the director and said, in a softer, more compassionate tone, maybe you should consider this. There doesn't seem to be any neglect. Quite the opposite, actually. The director watched them, Emily clinging to Margaret, the girl's eyes pleading like someone who had suffered far too much. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, lowered her shoulders and spoke in a quieter voice. All right, we'll get the paperwork in order. You can stay. But I want everything legally filed in the coming weeks. Emily looked at her in shock. You're letting me stay? Yes. Now go get ready for your performance. And save me a seat. I want to see for myself what you've fought so hard for. Emily ran to hug her too, still crying, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Margaret discreetly wiped away her tears. The tension dissolved into a shared wave of relief and emotion. The lead ballerina was back, and now, with a real home waiting for her in the wings, night fell under a magical sky. The grand facade of the Boston Academy of Dance's historic theater glowed under golden spotlights. A red banner hung over the entrance columns, Swan Lake, Annual Showcase, starring Emily Parker. As Odette, people gathered on the sidewalks, dressed in elegant attire. Among them were art critics, renowned instructors, students' families, and talent scouts from the most prestigious ballet companies in the country. There was a hum of excitement in the air, an unusual buzz. Everyone wanted to see with their own eyes the orphan girl who, in just a few years, had become the principal dancer of the Academy's most prestigious production. Backstage, the mood was different. Hands trembled. Makeup was carefully retouched. The sound of pointe shoes striking the floor echoed through the corridors. Emily stood before the mirror, already dressed in Odette's white costume. The makeup highlighted her piercing blue eyes, and the silver tiara added the final touch of tragic royalty. But she seemed distant from her. Reflection, silent, breathing deeply, trying to steady the heart pounding in her chest. That's when Margaret appeared, holding something in her hands, a blue ribbon, old, faded, the very one Emily used to wear back at the orphanage. The orphanage director gave this to me. We thought, maybe you'd want it with you today. Emily took the ribbon gently, as if it were a sacred relic. Her eyes shimmered with emotion. I left the orphanage alone, but everything I am today is because of you." Margaret pulled her into a tight embrace. "No, everything you are was already inside you. I just held your hand so you'd remember it." Just then, the stage assistant knocked on the door. "First act. Places, please." Emily closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something inside her was completely still. There was no fear, only presence. Strength. Love. The curtains rose slowly, revealing the shimmering lake of the stage set. The packed theater fell into a reverent silence, and then Tchaikovsky's music began to echo through the speakers like a whisper of destiny. Emily stepped into the scene with grace, her arms tracing the outline of swan wings. Every movement was precise. There was no hesitation. Her technique was flawless, but it was her emotional depth that captivated the audience. She wasn't just performing Odette. She was Odette, delicate and powerful, enchanted and resolute, imprisoned and free, all at once. In the audience, tears welled in eyes before the first act had even ended. Some mothers squeezed their children's hands, deeply moved. Teachers exchanged glances, visibly affected. And in the second row, seated with her hands folded neatly in her lap, was the orphanage director. She watched in silence, as if slowly digesting all she had overlooked for years. In the second act, Emily danced the iconic white swan variation with breathtaking precision. She executed her turns with seamless flow, held her arabesques with impossible lightness, and left the audience breathless during the most delicate passage when her eyes met the prince's. Even those who had never understood ballet understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. At the end of the performance, when Odette sacrifices herself to break the spell, Emily danced as if offering up her own heart. The final scene, where she throws herself symbolically into the lake, was so powerful, so deeply felt, that audience members began to rise to their feet before the music had even stopped. The theater erupted into thunderous applause. Everyone was on their feet. Applause that seemed endless. Cheers. Whistles. And tears. Emily stood still for a few seconds at center stage, her face lit by the soft glow of the spotlight. Her eyes searched the audience and found her, Margaret, standing, clapping with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, beside her. The orphanage director applauded too, but with a different expression, one of regret and respect. In the dressing room after the show, Emily received unexpected visitors, representatives from the American Ballet Theater, the Juilliard School, and even international companies. Everyone wanted to speak with her, to learn her story, to make her offers. And everyone wanted to meet Margaret, the woman behind the ballerina. But at that moment, Emily wasn't thinking about contracts or prestige. She sat quietly, still in costume, and looked into the mirror. She saw the blue ribbon in her hair. She saw her strong posture. She saw her eyes, now more mature. And she understood. She had danced with soul, but more than that, she had danced with memory. She danced for who she had been, for who she dreamed of becoming, and for the one who once saved her life with a hug, a home, and the courage to believe in the impossible. The morning after the performance, the city still seemed swept up. In the emotion of the night before, Emily Parker's name was everywhere. Local newspapers, art blogs, even radio stations that called her performance the most moving of recent years. But while Boston speculated, celebrated, and applauded, Emily woke up in her simple bed, with the same familiar blanket and the soft scent of coffee drifting in from the kitchen. There was Margaret, wearing her wrinkled apron, the kettle steaming on the table. She was making pancakes, just like on any quiet Sunday. The routine felt the same, but the world had already changed. "Good morning, Lake Star," Margaret said with a proud smile. Emily smiled back with calm, observant eyes. She sat at the table, and for a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, familiar, until Emily opened the planner that had been handed to her after the show. Inside were 3 formal invitations, one for an exclusive audition at Juilliard, another offering her a direct entry as a soloist in the American Ballet Theater's junior company, and the most unexpected, a personal letter from a renowned French choreographer, offering a season in Paris with housing and full tuition. Emily read each proposal carefully, but not with anxiety. She had never dreamed of fame, she had dreamed of belonging. They want me, she said, almost as if confirming it aloud. Margaret nodded, stirring her cup of tea slowly. Because you're brilliant, and because the whole world finally saw what I've seen since the very first day. Emily smiled, but her gaze grew more serious. She closed the planner and looked straight at Margaret. But I'm not going anywhere without you. Margaret stopped stirring. Emily, I mean it. I am who I am because of you. You taught me to dance, you gave me a home, you loved me. None of this means anything unless you're with me. Margaret took a deep breath. She had known this moment would come, but she never imagined that the girl she once welcomed, with downcast eyes and dirty feet from the road, would one day look at her with such strength and tenderness. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart, but I owe you everything, Emily replied, placing her hand gently over Margaret's, and not out of obligation, out of love. The words hung in the air like a silent melody. Margaret didn't respond right away. She simply squeezed the girl's hand, overwhelmed. She knew she wouldn't be able to change her mind. They truly were a family. In the days that followed, Emily visited each of the companies. She toured their spaces, met the directors, watched rehearsals. But every time someone asked her, "Well, what are you looking for?" her answer was always the same: a place where I can dance with truth, and where my mother can be with me. The invitation from Paris caught her attention the most, not only for its prestige, but because the proposal involved creating a new production inspired by real stories of overcoming adversity. Emily saw in it the chance to dance her story, and more than that, to help tell stories like hers. When she mentioned that she would be bringing Margaret with her, the French choreographer replied with a warm smile, "Then I will have two stars under my roof, one dancing, and the other, the one who lit the flame." Emily and Margaret departed for Paris at the start of spring. They carried few suitcases, but far more baggage than any airport could weigh. Together, they were beginning a new chapter. Emily quickly rose to prominence across Europe. Her authenticity, her grace, her technique, and her emotion made her stand out. She was the ballerina who made audiences weep, who danced with truth, who received each round of applause like a child returning home. And Margaret, far from remaining in the background, soon became recognized as a mentor. As the soul behind the spotlight, many dancers began seeking her out for advice, for choreography feedback, for emotional guidance. She who had once scrubbed floors for decades was now helping to shape true talent. In the quiet comfort of their new home, a modest apartment in the Montmartre neighborhood, Emily said one evening, "One day, I want to build something bigger, a place where kids like me can study, dance, dream, and be seen." Margaret smiled. "You will, and I'll be right there beside you, proudly sweeping the floor of that place." And so, they planted a new seed. Because for Emily, her journey with dance was never just about the stage lights. It was about sharing the light with those still living in the dark. A few years had passed since Emily first danced as Odette. She was now a respected name in the world of dance, celebrated in Paris, acclaimed in New York, invited to Vienna and London. But despite the spotlight and the endless mirrored rehearsal studios, her heart held on to a place she had never forgotten: Maple Hill Orphanage, deep in the countryside of Vermont. On a rainy spring morning, Emily woke up with a decision she could no longer delay. She was sitting at the kitchen table with Margaret, now with almost completely white hair, but with the same sparkle in her eyes. "I think it's time to go back." Margaret didn't need to ask where. She simply folded the newspaper slowly and looked at Emily with a small smile. "I've been waiting for you to say that." 2 weeks later, the two of them arrived at the village where it had all begun. The dirt road, the tall, silent trees, and the red brick walls of the old orphanage looked almost exactly as Emily remembered. Almost time had left its marks: the peeling paint, the overgrown garden, the empty, faded field. Emily stood in front of the gate. She inhaled deeply. The scent of wet wood and freshly cut grass awakened memories she didn't even know she still carried. The quiet laughter of children, the creak of metal beds, the taste of morning porridge. The current director of the orphanage, a kind woman named Ms. Holbrook, came to greet them. She was new to the role, but she knew Emily's story well. Her arrival had caused a buzz among the staff. "It's an honor to have you here. The children are excited to meet you," Emily and Margaret visited every part of the building, the shared bedrooms, the old dining hall, the study room where Miss Agnes once taught. Some walls still bore marks of the past, while others were bare and silent, as if waiting for new dreams to be born. It was in the chapel, as Emily stood gazing at the worn pews and dusty stained glass, that she spoke with quiet determination. I want to transform this place. I want to create a center for art, education, and care. Right here, in this orphanage. Ms. Holbrook was momentarily speechless. But that would require a complete renovation, new staff, funding, infrastructure. I have all of that, Emily replied calmly. And more than that, I have the will. I don't want a single child growing up here to believe their dream is too big. I want teachers, dancers, musicians, artists. I want books, workshops, theater. And I want them to be able to fly, even if they never leave this place. And so, the Roots Project was born, a tribute to the place where her very first dream had been planted. Emily didn't just fund the full renovation of the orphanage. She took part in every detail. She chose the colors for the walls, hired the architects, renovated the dormitories, built dance studios with new mirrors, curated a library filled with classic and contemporary books, and most importantly, assembled a team of professionals who were passionate about teaching. Margaret, as always, was by her side. She became the supervisor of the facilities, a counselor to the children, a confidant to the staff, and on the most special days, she taught dance to the youngest ones, her eyes sparkling each time a child raised their arms to imitate a port de bras. On the day of the grand reopening, Emily stepped onto the stage of the new auditorium built at the back of the old garden, in front of an audience made up of children, teachers, and townspeople. She spoke from the heart. I was one of these children. I slept in these beds, walked these halls, and cried on these floors. But I also dreamed here. And even when the world told me I couldn't, someone believed in me. Now it's my turn to believe in you. She looked at Margaret, seated in the front row, smiling through tears. This place gave me roots. Dance gave me wings. And love gave me the push. May this home now do the same for each and every one of you. Applause filled the hall. But what truly marked that day was the silence that followed, a silence thick with hope, the kind of silence that means something new, something big, is just beginning. And there, in that little village forgotten by many, Emily sowed the greatest legacy of her life, a place where dreams would be cared for like seeds, until they could bloom. The Roots Project, founded by Emily, grew with the same strength and sensitivity that had once made her shine on stage. In just a few months, the old orphanage in Vermont transformed from a forgotten shelter in the countryside into a national reference for artistic education, emotional care, and human development. The story spread. Articles in magazines, interviews on television programs, documentaries about her life. But Emily refused the labels. She didn't want to be seen as a celebrity or a heroine. She would say, simply, I just came back to water the place where I was once a seed. As the project grew, her career as a ballerina reached its peak. Emily was invited to dance on the world's most legendary stages, the Paris Opera, Lincoln Center, the Royal Ballet in London, Teatro alla Scala in Milan. She received standing ovations wherever she went. But unlike what many expected, she never distanced herself from who she truly was. With every new season, she requested only one clause in her contracts: freedom to return to the Roots Project whenever she wanted. And she did that often. She'd walk into the cafeteria with the same shy smile she had as a child, sit on the floor of the dance studios with the little ones, listen to their stories, help sew costumes, and always reminded them, I was one of you. Margaret's constant presence also continued to shape the lives of the children. She had taken on the role of educational director of the project. Even with aching knees and completely white hair, she was lovingly known as Grandma of Dance. She always had a piece of advice, a warm hug, or a perfectly timed scolding. And on many days, she would sit in the corner of the studio with a cup of tea, watching new talent be born right before her eyes. Once a year, Emily hosted the Roots Festival of Art and Movement, which brought together young dancers, musicians, and artists from across the country. The event took place in the new theater, built beside the orphanage and was always free, open to everyone. A celebration of art as a tool for transformation. At one of these editions, as thunderous applause filled the theater after an emotional performance by the project's young dancers, a journalist approached Emily backstage and asked, "After everything you've lived through, how do you define success?" She paused for a moment, then answered calmly, "Success is when what you've achieved helps open a door for someone who's still stuck on the other side." That phrase became a headline, but to Emily, it was simply the truth. One autumn afternoon, after returning from a season in Germany, Emily was walking through the garden of the Roots Project when she heard music coming from the main hall. She peeked through the window and saw a group of children rehearsing a choreography to Claire de Lune, the same piece that had played during her first audition, the one where she had been humiliated. Now, the melody carried a different weight. It was like a cycle coming full circle. A clumsy little girl tripped and fell. Some of the other children laughed, but one reached out to help her up. Emily entered the room at that very moment. "Do you know what I used to do when I fell?" she asked, smiling. The children went silent, curious. "I got back up and kept dancing as if nothing had happened, because falling is part of it. What matters is never giving up." The little girl who had fallen stood up, brushed off her knees, and smiled. Emily looked over at Margaret, who was watching everything from the doorway, visibly moved. In that moment, Emily knew her legacy wasn't only in the stages she had conquered, but in the hearts she inspired every single day. The brilliance of her career now nourished hundreds of other dreams, and every step she took on stage was an echo of her past, a bridge toward the future. The years passed like leaves swept up by the autumn wind, and though time left soft, subtle lines on Emily Parker's face, her essence remained untouched. The same girl who once danced alone through the halls of an orphanage, barefoot and full of dreams. At 34, Emily had achieved everything a ballerina could ever dream of: international awards, magazine covers, invitations to perform with the world's most prestigious companies. And yet, she held on to her simple routines. She still woke up early, warmed up her body mindfully, visited the children at the Roots Project, took care of Margaret's health, and always made sure to dance at least once a day. Whether on a stage, in a studio, or on her balcony at sunset, Margaret, now nearly 80, walked with the help of a cane. Her body no longer allowed for the graceful movements of the past, but her mind remained sharp and lively. And when her eyes met Emily's, there was always that silent look of love, of pride. The bond between them hadn't faded with time. On the contrary, it had become sacred. One winter night, after a special performance in honor of the Roots Project's anniversary, Emily brought Margaret onto the empty stage after everyone had already left. The lights were low, the curtain drawn, and the silence wrapped around the theater like a warm blanket. "Do you remember when you told me that was my last performance as Odette?" Emily asked, her smile soft and calm. Margaret nodded, smiling back. "I remember. And you said you would dance it for me." Emily gently held her hands. "Well now, I want to dance it with you." Margaret chuckled softly. "Emily, my back. Just one step. Just one gesture. Just to honor who you were and who you'll always be." Emily turned on the old rehearsal room radio. A soft piano melody filled the air. She took off her shoes, reached out her hand, and together, with slow, almost symbolic movements, they walked a gentle circle across the stage. Margaret, leaning gently on the arm of her daughter in heart, raised her arm like a swan greeting the morning light. Emily mirrored her with grace. There was no audience, but it was, without a doubt, the most emotional performance of their lives. At the end, Margaret sat down carefully and squeezed Emily's hand. "Now I can rest in peace when my time comes, because I know my legacy lives on in you, and in everything you've built." Emily, eyes brimming with tears, didn't speak. She simply rested her head on the shoulder of the woman who once saved her from the streets and taught her how to fly. 2 years later, Margaret passed peacefully in her sleep, in her home surrounded by letters from students, flowers from the orphanage garden, and a photo of Emily at her very first performance as Odette. Her memorial was held in the theater of the Roots Project. Instead of flowers, the children of the school left ballet slippers in her honor. Each one had a word written by hand: gratitude, strength, love, courage, light. Emily took to the stage, dressed in white, and danced alone, no music, no choreography. Each movement was a goodbye and an eternal thank you. Years later, at the age of 50, Emily announced her retirement from the stage. The dance world mourned, but she spoke with quiet certainty. "I've danced everything I needed to. Now, it's time to teach others to find their own dance." She officially took over as artistic director of the Roots Project, which now had branches in 5 U.S. states and partnerships with international organizations. Every year, hundreds of children and teens passed through those rehearsal rooms, dreaming big and knowing it wasn't an impossible dream, because one of them had already made it. Emily became a mentor, a guide, a teacher, but sometimes when no one was watching, she would return to the empty stage of the original orphanage, tie her old blue ribbon in her hair, close her eyes, and let her body dance in silence. Just her, the stage, and the living memory of Margaret. At the end of her life, when her biography was published, Emily personally wrote the dedication on the very first page in her own handwriting. "To all the children who were ever told their dreams were too big, may this story prove that it's not the size of the dream that frightens others, but the courage of the one who dares to dream." And there, among worn-out ballet slippers, old portraits, and vivid memories, the legend was born of a ballerina who danced with her heart and changed the world with both feet on the ground. Now that we've reached the end, tell us in the comments, what did you think of this story? And on a scale from 0 to 10, how many stars does it deserve? Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.